The title of the podcast I decided to listen to within the Health Law Talk podcast is Recent Fraud and Abuse Cases, episode 58. Within this podcast, they talk about significant fraud and abuse enforcement, like actions that are being taken when it comes to shaping the healthcare industry. This podcast talks about 10 major cases. The cases involved kickback schemes, improper referral arrangements, falsified documentation, and pharmacy pricing misconduct, which is something that we've talked about a lot within this semester. The cases, they show us how like the federal and state regulators continue to pursue like violations under the FCA, which is False Claims Act. They talk about the AKS, which is the anti-kickback statute, and they also talk about other enforcement frameworks. When it comes to fraud in the healthcare field, they talk about how fraud should be like held accountable for and how the intent for it is proven. And they also talk about how recent rulings, for example, recent cases has like reshaped the liability exposure for healthcare organizations, especially like when it comes to Medicare Advantage arrangements, when it comes to like behavioral health billing practices and corporate arrangements. Those things are very important because they do everything like behind the scenes. Like, for example, that's where everything starts. And something else that was important that this podcast talks about is like the risk when it comes to more recent healthcare business models. And there are many risks. One of the risks include like marketing relationships, which is very important. They talk about care structures, which is also important, and like reimbursement systems when it comes to data. And the reason for that is to like make things better and create a better space for like liabilities and things like that. And they also talked about the increase in like pricing when it comes to pharmacies and reporting requirements, which is also very important. And they talk about government program participation, which should not be something that is really talked about, in my opinion, because the government should be on it. Like, I feel like there's no reason that they should have to be reconstructed when it comes to like talking about their policies and how involved they are when it comes to health law and just the healthcare industry as a whole. At the end of the podcast, they mention how like enforcement is needed for 2025, and they talk about how the healthcare organizations should like strengthen their compliance programs and conduct internal audits and reassess vendor and referral relationships, because doing so would allow things to get better and it would make it less possible for things like fraud to happen. And it also would make it to where abuse in the healthcare setting is like less occurring than it is now, because unfortunately it's more occurring than we believe it is. So the episode basically ends with telling us how fraud and abuse enforcement is coming more, it's becoming more broader, meaning that they're thinking about it more and how they want to adopt different things to strengthen it and increase how it affects people in different environments. And thank you for watching.